And we are back with the grand finale of the grand finale. This is it, guys. Game 5 of event number 10's Old School Singleton, 7 Old School Singleton Finals. I am Brian Weissman. I'm here again with my good friend Nate Prodzik, and we are going to be calling the action for this final game. It is currently tied at two games apiece between Dave Firth-Bard on the left side playing White Weenie and Simon Christie on the right side playing Red-Green Aggro. Before we kick it off, let's just give a little recap of what happened in the last game. Nate, you want to tell us how the last game unfolded?
Oh, yeah. Well, it started out strong from Dave with early Savannah Lion, but before he could get too much pressure going, Simon had a early Elvish Archer to slow things down. But Dave did exactly what the White Weenie's supposed to do and played a bunch of creatures that allow him to push through small defenses like that, mainly his Bander, and eventually he got his damage prevention creature in the Samite Healer. And between that, his pro-red creatures, he drew both of them. It ended up being the case where he was just able to apply with a very large, essentially a do-it-yourself Urnum Djinn, a 4/5 band, where he could redirect the damage to pro-red creatures. And all that Simon could do was throw a dragon whelp down.
Anemically sitting on the battlefield, watching a bunch of creatures walk by underneath that it could not even really interact with. Do you think that there was any particular decisive moment in that game, or was it just sort of a steady onslaught?
Simon had the early removal. He had the red removal spell.
Yeah, disintegrate. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And you commented that you thought he targeted the wrong creature, which I totally agree with. And at first it seemed like that might be decisive, but by the end, it looked like it probably wouldn't have mattered. I think part of the problem was the issue that we noted where he drew an early Black Vice, which is just a completely dead draw, so it's almost like he mulliganed.
Yeah, it did 1 point of damage, right?
Yeah, exactly. 1 damage.
1 damage, 1 mana. Seems fair. Unfortunately, that's 2 points of his 7-point budget. Just to remind everybody that this format, one of the things that makes it unique, at least as an old school format, although I guess there is now another pointed regular old school format, but it's much more similar to probably a format like Canadian Highlander, in that there's a 7-point budget that you can spend across your entire deck, and the aforementioned Black Vice costs 2 of your 7-point budget. So when you're including that card in your deck, you're hoping to draw it early, as he did, but you're hoping to not draw it going second against a White Weenie deck and dealing 1 point of damage. So it was pretty much at almost the nut low in that game. Not quite. I mean, he did actually do a damage with it, but it was, of course, essentially a dead draw, and like you said, really akin to a mulligan. And in fact, given the way that his draw was, I mean, I think about it in retrospect. We know that he probably had Maze of Ith. He did have the Elvish Archer, so that may have been, those 2 defensive tools against White Weenie may have been enough to compel him, and probably the Disintegrate too, to keep a hand with the Black Vice. He can't really expect to deal any damage with that, and
right.
But maybe he just felt that the rest of his hand was strong enough to more than compensate for that. But he just got pretty much mowed down. And we're about to move to the final game here. And since he lost the last game, Simon Christie on the right side is going to be going first. And both players have just completed shuffling. And in fact, Dave has been shuffling for quite some time because he had to mulligan. He spent a long time looking at his hand. I imagine it was probably somewhat keepable, probably not due to land. He may have had too many lands, possibly, but he probably just didn't have a draw that felt aggressive enough to put enough pressure on the red-green deck before the red-green deck would get its more powerful tools online. So I think he's very thoughtful. He obviously knows his deck. I think he's played it in other events. He's undefeated all the way to this point in the tournament. So one of the things you can really do when you understand your deck well is knowing when to mulligan aggressively. Even when you may have a draw that's cohesive and playable, it just may not be perfectly suited for the matchup. And I think that's probably what he was considering. So he's redrawing his hand. We're about to see him look at his opening 7 again. And provided that both players are happy with their draws, Simon Christie will be kicking off the action, and Nate and I will be calling it as unfold. So sit back.
What?
Oh, go ahead.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I will say this. One thing to keep in mind is, as far as I can tell, if I remember correctly, Dave has not won going second.
That actually is a very interesting observation. If you think about that, Dave went first and had played a Pearl in game 1 and won that game handily. Game 2, Simon went first and won. And Dave went first in game 3 and lost, so he did not win that game going first either. And then he went first in game 4 and won. So you're right, he has not essentially broken serve yet, which says a great deal actually about the matchup and the tempo involved in it. So we'll see how that goes. We know that Simon is going first in this game. So if the pattern holds, it looks like my prediction will ring true, Nate. And Simon will take it 3-2. But of course, anything can happen, and we're about to call the action. So sit back, guys. Get comfortable. Here we go. Game 5. Let's kick it off in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so you can see Dave on the left side there. He's doing a little cut. And in fact, he's actually not doing the 3-pile cut. It looks like Simon has just told him to go ahead. And, you know, I've seen you riffle shuffle about 300 times. That's probably sufficient. Dave's checking out his hand here. Hopefully there's not another mulligan. It would be, okay, good. He's just putting one card back there, so he's definitely electing to keep. It would have really been a shame, actually, to see a double mulligan in the final game of the finals. And look at that. Just like that, a turn 1 Elves of Deep Shadow. It's definitely not his best mana dork, right? There's 2 other ones that are better because it only makes black mana. But look at this, a Pearl. Wow. And a 1/2 creature to mitigate damage as well. We saw this before. This is how game 1 started. So even after a mulligan, he got pretty much the best start his deck can have, probably short of that being maybe a White Knight or an Order of Leapor, which is just a little bit better.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the Pearl essentially is almost like he went first, plus he got the card draw, so he kind of like demulliganed.
Totally demulliganed actually there. The fact that he's accelerated ahead, although Simon, to his own credit, has 3 mana on turn 3, so they're both basically 1 turn ahead of regular mana development, and that's one thing about this 7-point old school Singleton format. It is pretty plodding in general. It's really, really actually hard. There's the Moxes. I was talking earlier about how there's a budget. The Moxes all cost 3. Black Lotus costs 3, and Sol Ring costs 4. Felwar Stone is really the only free mana accelerator that you're allowed to play with. I mean, there are a few other ones. Okay, interesting. So he elects to Ice Storm. He's going to take a point of damage to do that. That drops him to 19. And you see Dave quickly untap. It'll be interesting to see. He instantly has another Plains. So
yeah, this is an interesting, not getting defense out and taking some damage to do it. He's definitely hoping that this slows down the early development over there, because if it doesn't, that's actually not a good.
Yeah, well, you saw right there the Lieutenant attacked and just pumped itself. So actually that was just a 2 damage attack. He did not have a 3 mana play. And now Detonate comes down on the Mox Pearl. Boy. Interesting. I wonder if he had the Detonate in his opening hand, which would really explain the Ice Storm play, basically just hoping to catch this low mana White Weenie deck and just getting him stuck on one land where his deck will be pretty paralyzed. He does have a lot of white 1 drops, but he has a lot of his powerful tools in the matchup cost more than 1 white mana. So it'll be very interesting to see if the mana denial strategy works. Of course, he's more compelled to do that when his opponent is mulliganed. And often with a White Weenie deck, you'll probably, very likely, if you have a hand with like a Pearl and a Mox, you might actually... a Pearl and a land, you might actually elect to take your 3rd mana and put it on the bottom in order to keep more business. So,
yeah, that's true.
So down comes Maze of Ith. I don't know if that's a sign that he has no more land in play or whether he's just a little bit concerned by his hand, but we saw last turn that he was willing to play a land and pump, so I expect that he may not have any more plains in hand. And man, could you imagine if Simon has Stone Rain to go with that, the Ice Storm and the Detonate, how just devastating that would be.
Strip Mine
or Strip Mine or Chaos Orb. There's just a lot of options. Right. Or Granite Gargoyle. Granite Gargoyle, very good. Of course, the attack from the Elves of Deep Shadow is going to be blunted by the Maze of Ith, but there's no reason not to attack there, of course, because sometimes people forget. You'd be surprised. Often they'll be flustered, and you just say, take 1, and they go, okay, I'll take 1. They're unhappy about it, and then they notice that they had Maze of Ith in play post-combat. But look at this. Yeah. Yes, land destruction. Killed both Pearl and Plains. Dave cannot be feeling real good here.
No, that's the only other way this would make sense is if he actually is holding back a Plains.
Yeah, in order to balance potentially, right? Exactly. Right. And he does not have the ability to chump block and down come 2 more creatures. So, balance will kill a lot of these creatures if he has it, and it will kill at least 1 mana source. It is going to cost him a big chunk of his hand as well. So it's not like just a freebie. A lot of people forget that with balance. They think, balance is so great in a control deck. You can run it when they overextend and they put 4 creatures on board. And you cast balance, and you drop down to 2 lands, and you discard down to 1 card in hand, and then they top deck 3 more creatures in a row and kill you.
Right, exactly.
And that was Scarwood Goblins, a card I think this may be the first time in my life I've ever seen it in play. It's a random red-green creature, one of the very first, and I think it's so old that it literally has reminder text on it to tell you that it's both a red and green creature, even though it has a red and green mana in the casting cost. But 3 creatures now able to attack into this single Maze of Ith. He's going to obviously maze just one of the creatures.
There's a
Maybe
lot of
possibly
pressure.
see a Swords to Plowshares here that you might be considering. It's obviously an incredibly important tool in the matchup because it allows him to
Right.
deal with some of the bigger threats like the Dragon Whelp and the Urnam Jin. But I don't think, with his back against the wall like this, what do you think? Do you think he'd Plowshare here if he had it?
I think it would be correct. Um, but he might be willing to take 2 damage just to speculate and see what that that 5 mana over there is going to do.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we're seeing
I
Maze of
mean,
Ith.
yeah.
Yeah, and I agree.
He might also be concerned because of giant growth.
Yeah, and I agree with the decision to untap the creature that has that doesn't have potentially more than 2 toughness. And there it is,
Right.
Swords to Plowshares, just as we sort of expected. And he's going to remove the most potent creature, which is of course the 2/2 flyer. It really, from his perspective as White Weenie, though, you don't want to be in a position against Red Green where you're using Swords to Plowshares on a 2/2 flyer. That's not where this deck wants to be. And he needs to draw land pretty much right now or within a turn or two here. He's just going to be overwhelmed here. The
Yeah,
maze.
he's the good thing is that Simon's low on cards, but well, for one thing, he could certainly draw a wheel change that would change
Yeah,
that.
is he running? Can you check his deck list?
Let
Is
me
he
take a
running?
look.
Yeah, is he running Wheel of Fortune?
Yeah, horribly off center wheel. With,
Yeah, well, that makes it extra special and valuable. But look at this. Even though he's got all this pressure, a 2/2 and a flyer, he can only get through for just a single point of damage, and he has to pass it back.
wow.
Cannot be happy to not have any pressure. It's giving Dave all the time he needs to actually dig his way out of this with some more white. But he still has his hand must be about, God, at this point, 5 or 6 cards. These 2 creatures attack. How
Yeah.
badly? So if you were in Simon's position and you had Strip Mine or Chaos Orb, what would you kill? Would you kill the Maze or the Plains?
Oh, yeah. At this point, I would after multiple missline drops, I would kill the planes,
Yeah.
even though it slows down the pressure. I just think that's correct because the I mean, if he draws runner planes after you kill the planes, boy, you're gonna feel real dumb. Uh, but provided that doesn't happen, um, it's an extra turn of your opponent doing nothing and potentially could act like a disrupting scepter.
All right, we just saw a chump block here. Well, I think we
Wow.
can. Yeah, I think we can read the tea leaves here about what might be coming. And I have a strong suspicion actually that Simon's probably holding multiple lands in his hand because he's worried about balance coming, and we're going to see that right now for sure. Here comes
Yeah.
Wrath of God,
But
100%.
then, of course,
It's got to be 100%, right? Yeah, of course.
yeah,
So balance comes down. That was pretty much expected. The good news is that Simon's been very patient. He's probably held lands back in his hand, so he only loses 1 land. The 4 creatures are very painful, but there was no way around that. Although Dave did discard
no,
last turn. So that's 6 cards in hand for him. And Simon, I think, is holding 4. So Dave's going to have to discard 2 cards as well. We know
yeah.
his.
So Simon could have potentially overextended on land in order to, mind twist Dave a little bit harder. But I think land is more valuable to him because he has his X spells and his big creatures.
I completely agree, yes.
So,
And one nice thing about old school Singleton, of course,
ooh,
is well, obviously balance is pretty much a restricted card across the board. So that doesn't really
right.
apply. But just as a general rule, when your opponent uses a very powerful tool, maybe something like Wrath of God against you, you know that once it's gone, they don't have a second copy. They don't have a second swords, and you can play accordingly. So we'll see what he's got here
Yes.
as a follow-up threat. That, unfortunately, is not a creature, and that's going to buy Dave more time. He hasn't drawn land in a long time. It's
Yeah.
so funny that he didn't even change the sleeve on that Plains. It still says 16. Yeah. And down comes
Yeah.
Order of Leetbor, and now the momentum starting to shift a little bit in the other direction. He's got a Birds of
Yeah. Very
Paradise,
interesting.
but what he
Not
really, yeah, he really needs just a big creature. He needs something. He's got a maze. He's got a icy to deal with the Maze of Ith. So if he were to have
Choosing.
something,
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking he's choosing not to tap the billions, which
yeah,
is interesting.
I think it makes sense. I think that at this point you probably don't want to just get slammed by the order over and over again.
Hmm.
And now creatures coming fast and furious from Dave's hand. Unfortunately, he did have to throw away that very precious angelic voices, which I'm sure he would love to
Yeah.
have as soon as he hits another land. But I mean, he really didn't have much of a choice when you're stuck on one single planes and you're at 8 cards in hand. You're probably not going to keep a card that costs 4 in your hand.
Was it Angelic Voices? I saw it looked like the pro red creature.
A positive is angelic voices,
I
100%.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so Simon's got to think now. He's now facing down quite a bit of damage. At least those guys are small, but the Javelineer, of course, has the ability to shoot down Paradise. And for that creature that's on the left side, Osai Vultures, another creature that really has not seen seen the light of day
Yeah.
really in any decks. Just to remind people what it does, it's an old common from Legends, and whenever a creature dies, I think it's a global thing. Oh, Fireball. Okay, so what's he doing here?
Wow.
What's the split here? He can deal 1 damage to 2 targets. And what are they going to
So
be? What would you kill if you were in this position?
wow, one split one, huh? That's a hard one, but I think he's gonna. Is he gonna leave the vultures?
Yeah, well, I think
Wow,
he's
he's gonna leave
this
the
is based on what I was talking about. If creatures die at the end of the turn,
yeah.
any creatures die, I think you put a. It may be for every creature that dies at the end of the turn, you put a counter on the Osai Vultures. It's one of the very first cards that actually got counters, and you can remove 2 counters from the Vultures to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. That's all it does.
I thought it was carrion counters, right?
Something like that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Divine Offering on the Icy. Well, at least that'll tap down the
Big
order
play
for a
there.
turn.
Interesting. So now leaving the knight seems
Yeah.
not
What
quite as good,
do you
right?
think that Fireball was maybe a little premature? It seems like if
Yeah.
he had just waited a turn. I mean, obviously, you there is the potential threat of something like a Crusade or Jihad coming down. What I think he
That's
might have
true.
actually, yeah, what I think he might have actually been concerned about the fact that he played Dragon Whelp here. Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts about it actually, because I asked you a question.
I think you and I are on the same page. He was gonna. He's worried about the bird getting shot.
Exactly, yeah. That was my thought. As soon as you see him, okay, and of course Crusade.
Ooh.
Yeah, if Crusade's in play, then suddenly the Fireball is just a hell of a lot worse. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. It was the bird was his only source of red, and Javelineer would very likely have shot it down, and he would have lost access to red for some indeterminate period of time. And he really wants to get that whelp in play, even though there's a Maze of Ith. And interesting, there's no attack from the Order of Leetbor.
Yeah, trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's honestly rather shocking to me. I don't understand why you wouldn't go in for 3 there. It can first strike past the Dragon Whelp, so barring having something like Giant Growth, there's no way that Simon can actually deal with that.
And even if he giant grows, you just take more damage next turn and maze
Yeah, you just
the
maze your own Order of Leetbor exactly
yeah.
in order to save it. Very anti-combat tricks, and that is what the hell is that card?
Argovian pixies or
Oh, it's Pixies. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a weird fuzziness on it. Yes. So 2/1 creature comes down. Very, very good in some circumstances. Extremely weak in this situation. And Witch Hunter comes down as well. That is going to be
boy.
very problematic without some burn. And we've already seen Fireball used. He elects not to attack again, despite having Maze
Yeah,
of Ith.
another odd choice there. I think he might have been better off swinging first and then
Yeah.
playing
Well,
the.
keep in mind, right? The Witch Hunter is a 2/2, so it can block the Scavenger Folk. So he'd be trading. He'd be trading 3 damage for 2 against the Pixies. Maybe he's just concerned about burn, but it does strike me as being a little bit overly defensive for a White Weenie deck, particularly after he cast the Divine Offering and was able to heal himself up quite a bit. But this game has really shifted in momentum. It's just incredible how strong the Order of Leetbor is and just how good Crusade is. And now we're going to see Witch Hunter start unsummoning things, which should give Dave some free reign to start attacking. This game is getting very, very interesting. And I'm really wondering what's in Simon's hand.
Okay, now he's going to get in
All
there.
right, he's finally getting in there. This thing is threatening to be a 4/1, 4/2 first strike, which is kind of a nightmare for Red-Green to deal with. And he doesn't really have much choice but to just let it go through unblocked. We'll see if Dave elects to pump. Do you think he'll pump, or do you think he'll keep mana back to use the Witch Hunter's bouncing ability?
I think he'll pump once if he's going to cast something after combat, but otherwise I don't think he should.
Yeah.
He should definitely steal tempo here. He can even bounce the Dragon Whelp and turn and then untap and kill the mountain.
Yeah, that's actually a very valid point. We don't know if Simon has mountains, any more mountains in his hand. He may be holding some mountains back. You do have to be very judicious, I find, with a card like Strip Mine, though, because there are some very powerful and problematic lands, particularly the Maze of Ith and obviously Mishra's Factory. And you might think, oh, I'm going to mana screw him, and the guy's got 2 mountains, and then he draws Maze of Ith, and suddenly your offense just falls apart. You'll notice that he elected to cast the 2/2 Amur Kithkin, which is quite problematic for the red-green deck to deal with as well, because it can't be blocked by larger creatures. And the Witch Hunter, of course, can either unsummon, and it can actually just be tapped to deal 1 point of damage to the opponent. So he's got a little pinger going on as well to go with the Order Elite Boar, and quite a bit of pressure just piling up here.
To your point on the strip mine, that is basically what happened here, right? Because Simon used his LD to kill the early planes to try to slow Dave down.
Yep.
But he hasn't had a way to get rid of that maze.
Yeah, the maze. He just doesn't run a lot of ways to deal with it. He's as far as decks in general in Singleton, he has more ways to kill Maze of Ith than most decks. He has Stone Rain, Ice Storm, Chaos Orb, and Strip Mine, and Regrowth as well. So, and of course the Icy to tap it, which pretty much everybody uses. But you're right. In a Singleton format, a lot of turns will go by, and you just have to be staring at Maze of Ith for 15 turns. But these two guys are coming through, and he's obviously making this attack because the factory can't block the Argothian Pixies at all. And putting him in a tough spot where he needs to decide what to maze. It'll almost certainly be the Whelp. Does he block the Argothian Pixies here, or does he just take 2?
Looks like he's probably... Oh, he's trading.
Yeah, well, keeping in the same defensive vein that he clearly demonstrated before, it looks like he's just electing to trade. Probably just because he has more threats in hand. He feels like he has the advantage here. And along the lines of what we were talking about, using a strip mine after bouncing the Whelp, look, there's a Taiga in play, so it would have just come down right away, and then he would have to face down Maze of Ith. But I do notice that Simon is playing more lands out of his hand. It's almost like he's assuming that Dave is not going to be in a position where he wants to cast Armageddon, which kind of makes sense given the fact that he has both the Pumper and the Unsummoning Creature in play. And unless he's got a ton of planes sandbagged in his hand, he would lose a lot of utility on board if he were to blow up and obviously kill his own Maze. But maybe later in the game, if the Maze of Ith were to die, he would possibly consider Armageddoning as a follow-up.
The Witch Hunter, does it tap to deal ping? Does it ping?
Yes, it pings players directly, not creatures. It can unsummon creatures or ping players. And the unsummon ability costs exactly what he paid: 2 white and one generic. Oh. And so he's electing to unsummon main step and not attacking with factory. Do you assume that the factory isn't attacking because of Scavenger Folk?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Makes sense. Yeah, don't give him up.
He's also got to play, so.
Yeah, and he's got to play too, in the form of a 2/2 banding first striker. So think how much more potent that creature is with Crusade in play. So nasty. Yeah, and imagine if Jihad came down now.
Crazy.
Yeah, it would be crazy. Yeah, obviously, he would name green, and Simon would basically be in a situation where he would have to just throw his creatures into the wood chipper to avoid getting killed in 2 turns, which is often what Jihad does. It just puts you in a situation where you kind of have to just surrender all of your permanents of that color to avoid losing immediately. It does so much extra damage.
So Dave is using 3 mana each turn to tie up 4 mana from Simon.
Yeah, seems like
a good deal.
And obviously mitigating any incoming damage while attacking for damage himself. Yeah, this next attack, really, what answer does he have to this? These 2 creatures banded together with they both can first strike. That's 5 points of first striking damage without pumping.
Right.
Just completely impossible for red-green to do anything about this. Nate, you might be right. It's really starting to look that way. It looks so bleak for Dave early on, and now they're both coming in.
Certainly, and this is the first time we've gotten to see, a Crusade effect really do the work that
we expected it to. Exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
A little surprising to see him tap white mana over using the factory or the strip mine to give banding to the Acacian infantry, because by tapping a white mana, he loses the ability to first strike on the Order of Elite Boar and also use the Witch Hunter's unsummon ability. And you can see,
that's an interesting choice.
But you can just see at this point, Simon is now preserving his life total, saving himself as much as 6 points of damage by chump blocking with the 1/1. And down comes 3/3 flying first strike in the form of Thunder Spirit. This is just going from bad to worse.
Brutal.
Yeah, how much does this Crusade just make this game feel impossible? And he's got Dragon Whelp in play, but even that's not a blocker. This is actually one of the primary reasons why I added Aelipal to my blue-white control deck, was because of the card Witch Hunter. I tested a ton against Dave's deck, and because I expected to, he was doing really well in the event, and there's a Tournament of Champions coming up in a couple months, and I expected to probably have to face it at some point. And Witch Hunter was kicking my ass because so much of my defense was these big 4 and 5 and 6 drop creatures. And if he gets active Witch Hunter, you just can't use your creatures defensively. They just don't work. He's, like you said, he's paying 3 mana on summon 4. Here goes the Whelp back. Now these guys attack Unbridled. This is this is almost lethal damage. Is this it? That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is 10 damage. And he's assuming attacking, they're all separate as well. He's got a Shatter for the Factory, which is just, I mean, it's just a tiny little Band-Aid over a gushing wound. Yeah. They're still coming in. He's probably going to have to just chump block with Bird. Fireball's already gone. He just takes a huge smashing hit there. That's 8 damage. He drops to 2 with a Witch Hunter in play.
Right. You can't really pyrotechnics your way out of this one.
No, you really can't. The Crusade just...
At that life total, he can't even... Dave he's too high to get a forced draw with the Hurricane. So I don't think... And
that is it. Just like that, Simon Christie draws the last card of the match and the tournament and makes Dave Firth Bard's White Weenie deck the champion of event number 10. Dave's deck goes undefeated. Absolutely incredible showing. This deck was just monstrous, and Dave shows him the inevitable Armageddon to follow up in case Simon were ever able to dig his way out of that. But I think the writing had been on the wall for a long time, and pretty much never. I'm going to pause the video at this point because these guys are going to sit there and talk about the game for my video runs. Looks like another 14 minutes, so they have a 14-minute postmortem. We'll try to cut it a little short on our side. So Nate, in the end, you were correct. I am humbled. You called it perfectly. And although the match was maybe a little bit closer than you expected, going all the way to 5 games, the games that Dave won were in very decisive fashion. His deck just performed brilliantly. And it's incredible. What a comeback, though, in that 5th game, right? To be down 1 land in a Maze of Ith and discarding to hand size against an onslaught of creatures. But, Jesus, balance. What an insane card, right? That's
why that is actually my favorite card in Magic. So I'm always happy.
Fortunately, in the formats we play, we're primarily Commander players these days. We never have to contend with that card because, imagine balance in Commander. How ridiculous! Imagine it in a 4-way game, right? It would be so ridiculous.
For balance.
Yes, obviously the card is banned, but it's legal in this format, and it's only 1 point. And I think one of the reasons why balance is only 1 point in the format, as powerful as it is just because in the absence of all the fast mana, the card is a lot harder to make asymmetric. It's really, really hard to exploit it, to use it as a one-sided Armageddon and Mind Twist the way that you can consistently do that in Old School. And for people who play a lot of Old School and are wondering why balance is so low cost, that's the reason. And in fact, I elected not to even run it in my blue-white deck because of the fact that I just felt that situations where I would be able to use the card to my advantage rather than just using it as I'm not gonna die for 2 more turns kind of effect, which is not really what the card is good for. I decided not to run it. Although I think if I were to rebuild my blue-white deck again and run in another tournament, I think I would actually use balance because my deck is so dreadfully bad against mono black, as the testing has shown. But that's a story for another day. We were able to cover this fantastic match. Really wanted to express gratitude to the tournament organizers and, of course, to our competitors, Dave Firth Bard and Simon Christie. Simon, amazing red-green deck with all the incredible miscuts. It was really cool to watch this deck in action. And Dave, congratulations on your undefeated finish. It was a pleasure to watch you pilot this deck, and I am looking forward to facing you in the Tournament of Champions down the road. Thanks again for joining us, guys, and hope to have more 7-point Old School Singleton action down the road for you guys to enjoy with my good friend Nate. Nate, thanks so much for joining me as well, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, anytime.